Well, stories. I've been studying the history of my grandfather and the history of my tribe, the Iroquois Confederacy, and Oneida tribe from back in New York. And all of their history and all of their stories are oral. And write them down. How do we get from storytelling around the campfire and around the table to writing stuff down? And I would venture to say most of you have written a lot of stuff in your lifetime, right? How many of you have written a personal memoir? Just show of hands. You have, yeah. And you're getting there. Isn't that interesting? What'd you say?
Tell stories.
Tell a bunch of stories. There's a book, it's a project book, goes about a year long. And children give it to their aging parents. To find out what in the heck we did. And one of the questions is, why'd you marry mom? Why'd you marry dad? Why'd you do this? Why'd you do that? Have you done that? Mm-hmm. If you've got the kit. Is it fun? It's interesting. Yeah. It's hard work though, isn't it?
It is.
And it lasts a year and you got to answer all this stuff. And when you're done, you send it all off to the publisher and they bind it, put it in a thing.
What's the kit?
Yeah, what's the name of it? Do you know?
Oh, I just got a book from my daughter for a Father's Day gift, and I did that and gave it to all of the children.
If you look online, you'll find it.
There's a bunch of them.
There's 3 or 4. And the gist of it is, of course, is to tease you, give you writer's prompts, into telling your story. And I know somebody that worked at it for a year, and they just, oh my God. And they were always looking at me, and they said, you make it look so easy. I said, believe me, it's not easy. I said, so what are you doing? They said, we're writing our life story. I said, what parts do you really like? They said, well, one of the parts that's really interesting is, where'd you go to college? Why'd you go to college? What happened? And you know what's fascinating about this? And this fellow has a PhD in geochemistry. He's a good friend of mine. His dad said, we don't go to college, we work. This is a foolish idea. Wow. So he wrote about that. He had to write that. He was compelled to tell his children and his grandchildren, there's a value in something I do. Not everybody holds the same value. And I'll give you a short quip. So, Native American background, my mother went to the 7th grade, all the way up to the 7th grade, in a Christian Lutheran boarding school in Wittenberg, Wisconsin, called Bethany Indian Mission School. And my grandfather and my grandmother both went to Carlisle Indian School in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. He went in 1885, she followed about 10 years later. Now, Carlisle Indian School was the first school of its type in the U.S. government, the largest Indian school in America. Over its tenure of some 30 years, they had over 10,000 students, only 500 of which actually finished the 5-year curriculum. When you signed on, you had to sign, your parents had to literally sign a paper saying we give all right and responsibility and authority to the federal government over our kids. For 5 years.
Wow.
Yeah, wow. You know what that implied? If the kid was a jerk or he ran away, guess where he went? The same place my grandfather went, to prison for running away from school. Wow. That's a lot of authority to grant somebody. But that was the gist of the schooling, and the thought was, we have to take all these kids, we move them over here so they can become civilized, educated, and Christianized. And this is the way we're going to do it. We're going to pound it into them. Well, it obviously didn't work very well. So, I'm compelled to tell that story. And everywhere I go, I got to tell you about my grandpa. You know why? Because the story is so dramatically unbelievable. And we just go, what? That can't be right. We wouldn't have done that. We did. We did. Some of the attitudes still go on. But what's interesting, from a faith and writing perspective, is my grandfather, before he died, he pulled me aside, and I remember this distinctly. We were talking about stuff, about land being taken, our land, our own personal land. he said, Junier, and he talked mostly in Oneida language, used very, very few English words. He said, don't be bitter. Wow. Okay. You know, I was 6 years old. What do I know? Now that I'm going back and researching the history, I understand what he's talking about. There's a reason to be bitter. And you know what? A lot of people write about that. A lot of people say, you know what? I'm bitter, and I'm going to tell you about it. And here's why. But there has to be a counterbalance. There has to be the grandpa and the grandson in there that says, don't be bitter, and here's the reason why. So with that, I've got about 6 or 7 slides I want to show you, and they're life experiences. So I call this writing to the world in my life. And I'll tell you up front, I want you to believe it because it's absolutely true. Every single one of you, every single day, has a story to tell somebody else or tell yourself. And those stories are powerful. They're powerful like that kid, because they're going to remember you. They're going to remember why you married Leah. And by the way, Leah, what are Gerald's biggest faults? Would you mind? What are his biggest faults? He doesn't have any. Good answer. Yeah. Oh, look at this. Isn't that neat? So that's in Honduras. There's a school. I think there's 22 kids there. The Christian church sponsors that teacher. The government is supposed to do it. You know what? The government never shows up. They never show up with the teacher. They're supposed to provide that teacher every single year. They don't do it. Why don't they do it? I don't know. They're busy. The church steps in and says, we will teach these children. Now, mind you, they don't have a lot. If you look to the left, that's their library. I've got a few pictures here and there. This is an adobe stone type of building. And there's another classroom with older kids. Anybody in here ever go to one-room school building? You did, I did.
I visited.
You visited. That counts.
Never.
In mine, they had, it was on the reservation, Oneida Reservation. And they had, well, the younger kids they put in a separate room somehow. So there was 3, 4, 5, and 6. I was in the 5 and 6 group. So the 5th and 6th graders sat over there, and the other ones sat over here. And the teacher would come over here and get you all started, and then they'd go over there, and we're all throwing spitballs and doing whatever. And they'd get us going, and then we'd do our stuff and help each other. And then she'd come back over there, back and forth, stuff like that. This is kind of that situation, though what happens in the older ages, they actually went to a different school, government school, but they had to travel. So a lot of kids just didn't go. And then, now this is not that long ago. That's 2005. So I had the opportunity to be there, and you know, we teach numbers, alphabet, basic word recognition. But a very important concept was to teach the creation of the world. Where'd the world come from? How did God do that? Where did he get the clay? You know, where did he get the bang? If there's a big bang, where'd the bang come from? You know, and these kids were all, have you ever seen a dinosaur? It's fantastic. What a story. No, I didn't write that story. I'm not writing this story. But an educator is somewhere, and that's an important story to tell, because still, in parts of the world, this is what happens in education of young minds. Well, here's a story. Same village. Now, I set up a medical clinic in the mud, in the dirt, literally in the dirt. And I had some tables. We don't have a folding table in here, but I have a folding table in the back of a Jeep. That was the operating table. What do you notice? Look very carefully about the child and the mother, and look at their legs, and what do you see? I always teach this to medical students as a top power of observation. She's got the mud. Child doesn't have any. She carried this child 3 miles through the mud and the muck and the filth and the bacteria and the snakes and the garbage, which I have pictures, but I don't have time to show them. she said, there's something wrong, my baby can't breathe. Now this is, I think the kid's about 4. So sure enough, baby can't breathe. What do I do? Well, I said, well, I think this kid's got pneumonia. Now mind you, there's no technology. There's no x-ray, no CAT scans, there's no lab. There's brain, stethoscope, and hands and eyes. That's it. So I said, baby's got pneumonia and pretty sick. Kind of got floppy arms. Bad sign. So what do we do? Go to one of the elders in the local church. Say, can we borrow your house for a couple days? Yeah, sure. We made a house hospital. Kid stayed there. Now, miraculously, the kid recovers. What a story. What a powerful story. It's where, one of these things where I say faith meets the road. The rubber meets the road, faith meets the road. And it's not me. It's the entire body of believers who, some gave money for me to go, some gave medicines for me to go. The entire faith community in Honduras is geared up to solving this woman's problem with her daughter. The government didn't bring us there. The local church did. And what was powerful about this, she heard the story, not through a journal, not through a newspaper article, by word of mouth and hearing from 2 villages away. Amazing. So she says, I gotta go. If there's doctors and medicine, I gotta go. That's one story. Let's look. Wow, where's this? That's Rwanda. United Nations estimates there are nearly 3 million refugees during the Rwanda war. I don't know how they get that. It might be true. It might be only 1 million. It's a big number, whatever it is. And you'll notice all these tarps. Those are typically 12 by 12, 12 by 18 tarps. United Nations hands them out to every family, and that's their home for the next year or so. That's it. That's what they got. There are 4 or 5 people living in there, plus kids. There's a road. You see this road kind of runs down the middle? It's hard to see. You can barely make it out. You know what that road's for? 2 reasons. One is to distribute rice and beans. And the truck goes out and they throw these big, giant 100-pound bags of beans out. And then the mamas make fires. I think I got a picture of a fire. And they cook them. See those kids sitting around there in the middle of the logs? You know what the other reason for the truck is? To haul away the dead bodies. Hundreds a day. We set up a medical camp there. Now, we'll tell you this story, and I have it written in my book. So, I was on a first strike team to go into this area under a UN mission, non-military, but a humanitarian UN mission. I went with United Methodist Commission on Refugees, all right? And there's everybody's there. Caritas, United, Billy Graham's there. Everybody's there. Everybody who's got a name in world disaster relief is at Rwanda. There was an article printed by Time magazine. You know what it said on the front cover? There are no devils in hell. They're all in Rwanda. It was true. So in my camp, and this is not too far removed from my camp, I had a camp of about 600 civilian casualties that the Hutus and the Tutsis got after, and they tried to kill them, or preferably, you know what they did? They cut their legs off and let them go, because they wanted them to suffer. So in the camp, I had a lady. It's probably about 25. And she went down to the river to gather water, and the insurgents across the river shot her in the arm. The bullet went through the axilla, cut the artery, went in the chest, out the breast, both sides, made a tunnel in the sternum and out. She was dying of infection. She had probably a 6 to 8 month old baby. She was so dehydrated she couldn't make milk. She held the baby was dying. Half mile away is another physician from Japan. He's doing pediatrics. I bump into him accidentally one day. I said, "What are you doing here?" He said, "What are you doing here?" I tell him my story, he tells me his. I say, "I got a baby. The mother's in real bad shape. She's probably gonna die. Would you take the baby?" "Oh yeah." Now, you know what? The church organization had sent boxes and boxes of medicine. In fact, it's the one that we raised money for. In it were hundreds of vials of pediatric amoxicillin. What am I going to do with amoxicillin? I got all adults and one child. The one child whose mother had been shot through the breast. I tried everything I could to talk her into letting me amputate the arm and the breast. She wouldn't do it. She said, "Hapana, no." Why? How will I feed my baby when we get to heaven if I only have one arm? Wow. How do you dissect the kernel of that story? There's lots of ways to do it, and I try in my book. But the one thing I noted was my own personal despair. I can't do anything. You can't always do anything. Everything you want, it's not always there. She did die. 3 days. Took the baby, took the amoxicillin, went down to the tent. I said, "Where's Dr. Ashimuro?" He's out cleaning his hands. "Oh, okay. Well, he'll be back in a couple of minutes." He comes back. "What are you doing?" So I was delivering babies. He said, "I see this curtain." "Yeah." Now he's only got a 12 by 12 room, right? And he's got a curtain down the middle. He said, "Half day I deliver babies, the other half I take care of them." That's a story. That one I wrote down. Let's go on. Here's another kind of writing. And I think some of you do this kind of writing. It's scientific inquiry. It's facts. It's numbers. It's powerful in its own right. You know what this tells me? Look at this. This is the amount of money spent per year, and this is old data. This is 2017, I think. Is it on there? 19, yeah. Well, who spends the most in the world? Of course we do. We spend more than 25% of GDP on healthcare in America. Okay? Now, Africa, where I was, $50 a year per person. Actually, the number was 40. What can you buy for $40 in healthcare? Not a whole lot. In fact, you can't buy anything. You know, in that same camp, I had a man come to me. He was the oldest guy in the camp, and I write about him in the book. I think he was 65, maybe 68. He was getting up there. Up there. Give me a break. I'm 72. What? 80? 85? You can't remember how old he is.
84.
84. 64.
I got him beat.
You do? 87?
86.
There you go. Take a gentleman of your age and younger. I had a whole bunch of MREs from the Army, and I had a rule. I give them, they were for me, but I said, I don't need these. You know, I'm 10 pounds overweight. What do I need this for? If I operate on you, cut off your leg, you get an MRE. The guy walks up to me at the end of the day. This is going on for a couple of weeks. He said, I'm hungry. I'm starving. May I have an MRE? Daktari, he says in Swahili. And he says, and the translator tells me, he wants one of your MREs. I got a rule. You gotta have an amputation. These are for just the people, I'm so sorry. They're only for the people who have amputations. You know what he does? He says, Daktari, cut. Can you see why that story compels me to write? Cut. I said to the translator, tell him it's only for medical necessity. He said, Sir, Dr. it's necessary. Oh. You know, that's the story that sticks with you forever, right? You got to write it down. So I do. I come home, I write it down. Well, I'm not a total jerk. I sneaked him an MRE and a bottle of vitamins at the end of the day. He was like a kid in a candy closet. I mean, come on. 2,200 calories in MRE. And did we make a difference? Yeah, sure, for a day. What happens after that? I don't know. Take a leg off and do a field amputation like I wanted to do for the woman. I did several on others. And the pain control program was this. Here's the bottle of Tylenol. Take as many as you want. Because we got nothing else. We didn't have anesthesia. I gave them veterinary medicine to knock them out. Cut the leg up. They used to wake up in the middle. That's a story, right? You, maybe not doctors in the field, but you have interest and compelling stories that should be written down there. Every bit is valuable. So this one just tells you that disparity and kind of what's going on in the world. How is it possible? An entire set of countries can spend $40, $50 a year, and we can spend $20,000 a year per person. Old number, the number is almost 40 now. Oof. Maybe, well, enough said. Who's that? You know who that is? Elie Wiesel. He wrote the book Night. He was in Auschwitz as a young man, as a teenager. Went to Yale, a PhD in sociology, lectured all over the world on POWs in the prison camps. He made it his life's work, his life's writing, to tell the horrid story of what happened. So I was in a refugee camp, managing a refugee camp in Albania, and I'm doing stuff at the tents. There's 300 people, and I see this government van pull up. I think I'm probably in trouble, going to jail. Elie Wiesel, I know who he is. I've seen his pictures, read his books. He walks out, and I go, boy, that sure looks Elie Wiesel. Is that him? He walks over to me, Dr. Kerstetter. Are you Dr. Kerstetter? I said, well, I don't know, it depends. He said, I'm Elie Wiesel. I said, I know who you are. He said, do you have any people here who've been the victims of torture? I said, man, every single 10. Which one do you want to start? He said, let's start with the worst ones. You want to know what they are? There's a man who's 45-ish. He had a preteen son, 14, 15, something like that. The Serbs captured him. Now, these are Albanian refugees. The Serbs captured him and put his father and son in a cage and made him fight to the death. And the rule was, if you didn't hit that other guy as hard as you could, we'll kill him in front of you. He didn't want his son killed in front of him, so he hit him. They beat each other up. And he survived. He said, start with that guy. So Elie wrote the stories. Why? Because they're important for the structure of society. They're not entertainment, not unlike the data slide. It's not entertainment. It gives us information that's valuable. Stuff that we need to share, stuff that we need to contemplate, stuff that we need to think about and tell other people, this is not right. Or my grandfather, Geneva. Don't be bitter. Wow. Those are stories. Let's go on. I've got more. Wild Bill West Show. The Wild Bill, an interesting guy. He was an entrepreneur. By today's standard, made millions off of this Wild West Show. The cowboys and Indians parade around the country and show stuff. Mostly it was stuff like Indian battles and Custer, Sitting Bull, all this stuff. And he put on these big shows, and people from all over, especially back east, they'd go to see these. And yeah, if you read the history of it, it's kind of interesting in a way. Well, guess what? They went to Carlisle Indian School. And one of my grandfather's acquaintances from the tribe, who was younger, went to the show. His name's Frank Green. Now Frank, according to Captain Pratt, who ran the school, Frank Green of the Oneida tribe ran away 8 times. My grandfather ran away once, and he got put in prison first. We think in about 2 weeks. All the research I've done would indicate, and it was the pattern, that if you ran away, you got put in jail, or you got whipped, bare-skinned, in front of the entire student body, till you were bleeding. Frank Green ran away 8 times. Brought back. He went to the Wild West show. What did he do? He ran away. He joined the circus. 30 miles outside of Harrisburg, which is 20 miles south of Carlisle. He was getting, it's unclear what happened. He was getting on the train or off the train or something. He got cut in half by the train. Now, I'm going to read you a very important piece of writing. That's a letter. I'll read it. This is from this Captain H. Pratt was a cavalry officer who was in charge of the school. He was an Indian fighter out west, and he was assigned to watch over a cadre of captives at Fort Marion all the way in Florida. So he did. He is the one that had the idea to come up with this school. Okay, so he writes his boss, the Commissioner of Indian Affairs. This is 1898. All right. Sorry to inform you that one of our boys, Frank Green from Oneida, that's on my tribe, was run over by a freight train at Mexico, which is 50 miles west of Harrisburg, badly cut to pieces. He evidently died at once. He was at Buffalo Bill's show surreptitiously Friday night. Now, the students went Thursday at a matinee, and Buffalo Bill had another show Friday night. So Frank sneaks off to the show again. Now look at this. He tried to persuade one of the other boys who had run away with him on a former occasion to go off with the Wild West show. The other boy declined to go, came out of the school, leaving Frank at the cars, railroad cars. The only other information we have is from the railroad company that he was run over by a train. Okay, Frank, God bless his soul, was an exceptionally bad boy. I held on to him last year, hoping we could turn him into better channels. He ran away from Carlisle 7 or 8 times. He was a thief, and he broke into the girls' quarters at night. Probably did a panty raid or whatever they did back then. Stupid stuff. This is the best part of the whole deal. Look at this. This is in the newspaper. It's called the Red Man newspaper. It reports on all the stuff at Carlisle. Here's his eulogy. Frank Green of the United Tribe, who was to have gone home next week. He would have gone home next week. Left without permission about midnight last Friday for the West. 30 miles, went to Harrisburg, was killed in a train, ran him over. It was thought that he was stealing a ride and probably went to sleep and fell off. Not. If you study the mechanics of injury, that's not possible. He was bruised about the head. His chest was crushed, the legs cut off. There's every evidence he died instantly. After due preparation for transportation, remains brought to school. Funeral services are held on Sunday afternoon. The poor boy has been a disturbing element for some time. Hence, the funeral was especially sad one. But, while few tears were shed for his loss. Why? He tried to get others to run away with him, but their good sense prevailed, and they refused to go. We trust that the lesson, though a severe one, will be of use to us all. Wow. That's powerful writing. This rotten Indian kid deserved to die. Let that be a lesson to you. Don't run away. So I'm writing about Frank. I got started on Frank Green, and my pen just kept going. I could write a separate book. That's the kind of story that needs its own book, doesn't it? Wow. He knew my grandfather. So let me get to my grandfather's story. At age 18, my grandfather, Levi Elm, went to Carlisle Indian School. They put him in a second grade, and he had a 5-year contract to stay there. Well, he didn't last but a year, and the school kicked him out. You go, why? He was like Frank Green. He kept running away. He was a bum. He was a bad actor. Here's what it says. Levi Elm from Green Bay, Oneida, Wisconsin. His father, Lewis, he's living 18. I don't know why they put the forced inspiration stuff in there. But he came on September 30th, 1885. Discharged the 22nd. Why? What's the cause of discharge? Worthless. That's the title of the book. Worthless. So there's the mentality. You know what? When I discovered this document several years ago, I sat down and I wept. I said, Grandpa, I'm so sorry. Wow. The government school, well, I'll tell you a joke here. It's not all bad. There's a t-shirt that I have in my closet. It says, you can trust your government. And on the bottom, it says, ask any Indian. The government we're supposed to trust, the school we're supposed to trust, to teach our children, to take them, to give them the vitality of education, puts them in prison, runs them over, calls them worthless. There's another document that says, well, he's unworthy of education. Wow. Wayne here is a specialist in, I think anyway, correct me if I'm wrong. He helps first generation college kids adapt, vaguely, right?
Sort of.
Sort of, yeah. Well, oh, that you could have been there to help. Why do you think we do these things in our society? Hire people like Wayne to help people who've never been. Well, it's important. And I was that kid that was never at. I wasn't supposed to be a doctor. Are you kidding me? 1885, roll it 100 years forward, 1985. You know where I am? Second year student at the Mayo Medical School. 100 years, 2 generations later. My mother used to grab me when I was little. She'd shake me like this. Junior! You have got to get an education if you want to survive. And then she would say this. And remember, she's 7th grader. She was taught to be a domestic. Scrub floors, clean tables, work in homes. Okay? Honorable profession, not knocking it. The mentality was, she can only do this. The other sentence she used to tell me, don't be like me, I'm only a scrub lady. I used to get mad at her. I said, Mom, she said, it's true. I was trained to be a scrub lady. Now, is that a compelling story to write? Yeah, sure it is. That's why I'm writing it. That's why I have to write it. I thought that would be interesting to show. Where's this? You know, I was a colonel in the United States Army, a medical officer, and I did 3 combat tours in Iraq. This is the first one. That's an 810 Warthog. And it does this. And I'm not going to show you. I have a dozen pictures of war injuries that I won't show. The one thing I'm unable to write is how loud that is. There's no words. All I can tell you, it's loud enough that your liver quivers. I don't even know if that means anything. What would you say? How loud is that? Louder than a pastor screaming when he gets home and his wife. No. What's this? Well, that I will tell you about. So I'm a medical doctor. I'm trying to save lives in the battlefield. Well, obviously that one didn't get saved. How many thousands of people? I mean, if you add up, my wife said something very interesting the other day, and I was giving a lecture somewhere. We were having a little feedback. She says afterwards, "I'm so tired of war." Her father was a career military officer in the Marine Corps, and here I come, career military officer in the medical corps in the Army. When she was gone, when I was gone, and she was home alone, 3 tours, almost 3 full years of contact. She told me one time she felt like I abandoned her. I said, "Dear, no, I didn't." She said, "Oh, I know you did." I'm telling you what, you asked me what I felt, that's what it felt. Wow. I'm trying to get her to write her own books. Now, I will tell you, and I have numbers in my book, but it well exceeds 1,000, might be into the 2,000s of dead with my own personal eyes. A lot of them in Rwanda, the mass grave, that was as long as the runway. My wife's right. It's too much war. Now someone's got to write that. I do, in a sense, if you read my book, but I write about it in a different way. I don't philosophize about it. I just tell you the facts. Here's what happened on this day, and then this day, and then this day, and then this day. And how are we doing on time? We're okay, aren't we? Let me do a couple readings. I will. In 1989, Saddam Hussein drew lines of speed bumps in the concrete road under the swords of Qadisha in Baghdad. It's a big, like, Arc de Triomphe, right in Baghdad, right outside of his palace, right outside my office. He had a triumphal arch built to celebrate his self-proclaimed victory in the Iran-Iraq War. The helmets reportedly came from the heads of executed Iranian soldiers. Saddam ordered the headless helmets filled with cement and embedded in the road. Thousands of additional helmets lay in the cargo nets attached to the base of 2 140-foot swords grasped by the forged metal likeness of Saddam's fists. I drove over the speed bump helmets once in a Humvee, like driving over small boulders. I stopped the vehicle to see if they were real. I got down on my knees, and each helmet contained a bullet hole. I touched the edges. Some were smooth, others jagged. A few of the holes had stellate edges that showed a tinge of rust. Several helmets contained 2 holes, entry, exit. Most holes about the size of a fingertip. One was the size of my hand. As I ran my fingers over the holes, I imagined the soldiers who once wore these helmets were not that much different from U.S. soldiers. They would have had families at home, perhaps wives and children, maybe even a dog or a garden. The families and friends would have wanted them to lie in peace. Instead, their deaths were on permanent display as reminders of inhumanity. I was sorry that I'd run over the helmets. I wanted to reverse my tracks, remove the dirt from my tires. It felt as if driving over the helmets represented a kind of insult. to those soldiers and the lives they lived, who, for the sheer barbarity of displaying war trophies, had been executed by Saddam Hussein. Well, let me read this. The chaplains have these services every week. And actually, they're some of the more profound services I've ever been to in my life. Because, you know, it's faith meets the road, rubber meets the road time. The chaplain says, anybody got any prayer requests? A young kid, probably 18, he's a private in the U.S. Army, stands up and says, sir, can I have permission to pray? I thought, well, that's kind of odd. Why you ask permission? He's not in charge. God is. Go ahead and pray. And here's what he said. God, me and my unit are going over the berm tomorrow morning at 0400. Can you make it so we all get back? Amen. End of service. That was it. The chaplain led us in the Lord's Prayer, out the door. And I mean, we come in loaded for bear. We got 50 cals, we got ammo, we got weapons. We plunk them on the, floor, the cheap wooden floor. And we're gone. Now, I write about that. The unsophisticated prayer of a private in the U.S. Army cut directly to the heart of issues of faith at war. Control. It was central to military doctrine and command. Somebody always has control. No matter how small the duty or the sector of battle, some soldier always held control over a mission. Control equated to combat victory and individual survival. When the soldier prayed to God to control the outcome of the war, I saw it as him asking God to deliver the blessing of control so we all get home in one piece. In essence, a prayer for God to stack the odds in our favor and against the favor of the enemy. The prayer stopped me cold. It made me hesitate and even doubt my faith. I wanted to believe in my heart that what the soldier was asking would come true, but I harbored a sort of practical cynicism that it would not. I had seen countless body bags of several different wars, and I knew the outcome in Iraq was not going to turn out quite the way the private was asking. When I heard the prayer, though, I realized the simplicity of the soldier's faith in God, and I wish I could trust so simply and powerfully. I did not think for a moment that his faith was baseless or that it rendered him weak. Rather, I feared that my own faith and my heart were hardened, that I'm no longer capable of pure faith and trust. His prayer gave me the sense that I had come to rely more on my own military instincts and medical skills rather than on the strength of prayer and the power of faith. I stood near the front lines of battle and saw two sides every day. The side demanding faith and the side demanding control, and I wanted both. But it was hard for me to comprehend how God allowed one soldier to die and another to live, or that some would lose limbs or eyes or sanity, and some would lose nothing. Everything I knew told me that war distributed pain and death, more like a game of roulette. The dealer spins the wheel and the ball falls on your number. Boom. You want the graduate course? I don't know. Should we do Q&A? Let's go to Q&A. And if any of you want to hang around and do medical stuff after, I got 2 slides that are brutally honest. Oh, let me just read one little thing. This is my grandfather. So my grandfather did not write any letters to me, but in my book, I have to reconstruct his life, and other than seeing him, I don't have much to go on, other than experiences of other like-minded Native American students. So I imagine what he would think because of what other students had written. And I write this little thing about This is the Commissioner of Indian Affairs, 1901. To civilize, therefore, is to educate. Educate means the breaking up of tribal customs, manners, and barbarous usages, and the assumption of the manners, usages, and customs of the superior race with whom they, the Indians, are thereafter to be thrown in contact. That's the context. That's the Commissioner of Indian Affairs. This is my grandfather at the 1 year point after being in prison for running away. This school is hell. I cannot conform to its harsh and rigid ways of living and learning. We have no rights as students or even people. Indians have no rights. Instead, we have a school prison, which is a guardhouse built of stone. I've been confined there days on end as punishment for running away. I counted the scratches on the walls and left my own among them. I left blood from my fingers. If I could, I would take all the Oneida students with me and run back to Wisconsin. I would open the guard gates and let all the students run free. We received beatings and constant ridicule in classroom. Our mouths are punished with lie-soper slaps. Disciplinarians scream, "No speaking Indian!" We speak it in secret anyway. Some students have forgotten the language of our ancestors. The fear of punishment stalks us like a rabid wolf. We know hunger and fever and sickness and death. And the young ones cry at night. We tell them to be strong and we sing them our prayers, but words and prayers are not enough. I think mostly they need hope. But many students have no hope. What is there to hope for? Can the ceaseless marching and drilling and silence teach us to survive? Can it teach us civilization? Can learning new prayers save us from our savage ways and bend our bones toward the white man's ways? Can new names and uniforms make us better people? I think no. Maybe for that, we need new white skins, maybe even a new soul. That's my grandpa's imaginary voice. All right, what questions do you have? Q&A. Yes?
So when did you start writing this? Were you taking journals like throughout your life, or was this you came like? What was the trigger that made you start getting this stuff down into words?
I was curious about it as a little kid. I'd write stories in school. My freshman English teacher, who's now like 85, she'd do creative writing stuff, and I'd write just wacky, goofy, freshman and high school stuff. And she was, now the stuff was a little odd and rough, but she'd say, "Jon Kerstetter, this is fantastic stuff." It is? Yeah, you should write some more. And I would. And she just put a spark in me. And I always remember that. And we did poetry. And I loved it. I didn't know anything about poetry. My grandfather read poetry, incidentally. It was interesting, but our family wasn't a literary family per se. When I got to school, I had enough teachers to say, well, look, write about that. Or just give an assignment. What's it like to be, coming off the farm and now you're in the big city of Iowa City and going to college? Stuff. So that was the spark. She started, and then later in college I took a number of English courses. I thought I'd be an English major for a while, but I wasn't smart enough, so I had to become a doctor. And but they would always encourage me. They said, "This is really fascinating." And one of the things they would say that I will say was different is you have a different perspective. Now, where do you think that came from? Experience. Talk about Native American experience. I love science. I love bugs. I love stuff of life. I was just inquisitive. So you got to take that and run with it. Well, and then I got off in science and medicine, and all the writing I did was science papers and stuff like that. Actually, here, when I later in my professional career, I took some of the writing courses in the summertime, and those were tremendous because you have peers. They're not professional writers; it's just guys like you and me with, "Hey, I wrote this thing. What do you think?" Well, it's pretty rough, but and I turned stuff in. And yeah, this is interesting. Pretty rough, but and so I did that, and that again sparked an interest. Now, here's the deal. When I was in Iraq, I was injured. Okay, and I was injured. I had like 9 surgeries in 1 year. During one of the surgeries, I had a cerebral embolism. I had a stroke. So I went. Now this is about 17 years ago now, 15 years ago now. I went from fully functional doctor to 3rd grade level in reading. I'd walk around like, you know, I was a drunk sailor on weekend leave. Couldn't stand up. I certainly couldn't engage in a lecture. You'd ask me stuff, I had no clue. So I just made stuff up because I didn't want to look stupid. I'd go to the library and I'd go to the children's section. I was worried they'd think I was a perv or something, you know. So Charlotte's Web, that was too hard. I had a good team of researchers and scientists, neuroscientists, who work with me. Said, we don't get too many doctors who get knocked down this far. We don't know what to do with you. Well, I said, I can't live like this. I can't. You know, I got to sit in the corner and drool the rest of my life. So let's figure something out. And it was reading. And 3 years into therapy, one of the professors said, I think we're going to send you to writing school. So were you out of your mind? I was reading at the 4th grade level at that time. I said, that's not going to work. Well, they did. And one of the schools, these distance ed schools, took me on. And it took me about 3 years to do a 2-year program. But I did it. And what normal students could do in an 8-hour day literally took me all week, all the time I could, you know, figure out. So I wrote that book in the throes of stroke recovery. And I worked on it years later. That took 8 years to write that. And when I had the interview with the dean of the school, the writing school, he said, he didn't ask me about writing. He just said, tell me a story. And I told him one of those war stories. And he said, if I can teach you how to put that in a book, you've got something. That was the start. And then it was, and now it's, I got to tell you this, because it's really important. The one thing about my grandfather's stuff, the 18 years old, worthless, that is so critically important, because you know how many people know about Carlisle Indian School? Not many. I mean, just a few. But it's a valuable story, and I think it's important. It's important, and I will say this, and I do in my research and in my writing, I take some definite sword jabs at the church, you know, big ones. Why do I do that? To point out what we shouldn't be doing. Well, everybody knows that. Do they? I don't know. But there's a certain value of knowing where we've been so we don't repeat the mistakes of the past. There's also a certain value in it that hopefully my writing is sensitive enough. And it's not an apology for the red man against the white man. That's not it at all. But it does put into juxtaposition cultural values, like the Commissioner of Bureau of Indian Affairs. You guys are a bunch of bums. Well, then why are you in charge of that department? See what I mean? And it helps us focus on good questions, I think. Who we are as a faithful people. What do we do with it? And there's so much emphasis on race and culture and you know, the crazy part of it these days. And some of it makes no sense. A lot of it tries to make sense. But I think, if anything, my writing in my book purpose will to encourage the church, to encourage the faithful to be friends of the unfaithful. That's the deal. So, blessings and salutations.
My knee would be.
Yeah, yeah. No, I understand. Anything else? Yes, sir.
Are you still writing the new book?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, you know what? I gauged how well I'm doing on my page count, and I just reached 501 pages. In 1 year. The last book took eight years. So I think I'm doing better.
Or you like to hear yourself talk.
Or I both, yeah, that too. I enjoy lecturing because believe it or not, I learn new things every time I lecture, and it's almost like therapy for me. Yes, Wayne?
So, just a writing question, so you get 501 pages.
Yeah,
How will you know when it's done?
when I get there. No. I kind of have a gauge of what I do, I write, and I'll go back and read it and go, well, you know, wait a minute. I need to fill the gaps here because I left people in the lurch. They won't understand what I'm talking about. I have a sense I'll probably do another 150 pages and I do have to have, you know, a parenthesis around it somewhere. Otherwise it'll turn into 2 volumes. No one's going to read that except historians. But it's a good question. The strategy of writing is interesting that A, you got to start. And B, from the start you got to get somewhere. Well, where are you going to get? There's a gazillion ways to write the book, the topic, to build a sentence. But I don't have a gazillion years. So I have to be very decisive and say, okay, look, here's the focus, here's what we're going to do it. And some days it's painful, you got to lock yourself in a chair and not turn the TV on and do crazy stuff. And you know, it pays off eventually, and it's a step. If I can do a page a day, man, I'm doing great. You know, I've done more than a page a day. Some days I'll do 4 or 5 pages, but I get excited about different materials. The story on Frank Green, you know, I spent 2 months on that. It's only 20 pages long. So I didn't know the story of Frank Green before I was doing the research, and I just bumped into it, and I thought, wow. His family said the same thing my grandfather said. They found that despite the tragedy, they have to tell the tragedy, but they can't live in it. They said we have to move on and we can't be bitter. Otherwise it'd be stuck there forever. So they use it, and there's scant information about it actually. But hopefully my book blows that up a little bit and people become aware of that. This stuff actually happened. There were 2 girls at Carlisle who, during my grandfather's time, they got pissed off. So they decided they were going to burn the school down. They put that Red Man newspaper in a pillowcase and lit it on fire and threw it on the floor and went to chapel. Well, of course the thing went out. They had a military tribunal convened. Sentenced 18 years in a federal penitentiary. Reduced down to a couple of years. There's another girl at a different school years later, 10 years later. Same thing. Now she actually did some damage to the school. Sentence, death. Commuted to life in prison at Leavenworth. She didn't hurt anybody, and she estimated destroyed $20,000 worth of government property. Some cheap crap school desks and stuff like that. Serious business, man. Those Indians get out of control. But that was the thinking. That was Leavenworth. If you look up the history of Leavenworth, it's fascinating. This is where my research takes me, and I didn't know anything about Leavenworth. You know anything about Leavenworth? It was a prison designed specifically for the frontier and Indians. Before it became a federal prison, 78% of the occupants were Native American. That's where this guy, and they were all men. And this woman was sent. Fortunately, the warden said, no. We can't have an 18-year-old girl in this prison. You'll be raped and killed in 1 week's time. So he sent her somewhere else. President, I can't remember, Taft, when commuted her sentence finally and sent her to Carlisle Indian School.